All right. Hello. Welcome to an episode of Zero-Duality. And on this episode, we ask ourselves whether the individual can stand alone together. And we're not asking whether the individual can come together based on knowledge, memory, or experience, based on a common flag, a common rhetoric, a common argument, a common point of view, a common ethnic background, a common, and so on. We're also not asking whether the individual with the courage to stand alone lives in isolation, in separation, without the mirror of relationship. We're not asking that either. We're asking whether the individual who has the courage to stand alone can come together with other individuals who also have the courage to stand alone. And so, what do I mean by individual? Are we asking whether the individual can be defined by a certain set of parameters, mechanically, between this and that, between then and now, between here and there? Or is the individual indivisible? At the point of individuation, so courageous in a world, as we can see, which is greatly divided. And like-minded groups get together in separation and believe in one another on a conditional basis. We can see this in all walks of life, in all parts of the world. It is the status quo. All one has to do is go onto the YouTube, go onto the Reddit, turn on the news, and we will see how the individual in fear of isolation, in fear of abandonment, in the fear of not having a purpose, bands together. Can the individual be indivisible, meaning whole, meaning being able to observe on an unconditional basis, not based on the past, not in hopes of the future, but rather an observation which is not bound to psychological time. What is psychological time? It's thought. It's the mechanical process of knowledge, memory, and experience. And through such a mechanical process, most people tend to individuate and separate psychologically, internally. There begins the mechanical process of an analyzer, analyzing. An analyzer who looks at the content of consciousness and analyzes from there, from within psychological time, from within the boundaries of one's own knowledge, memory, and experience. But is not the analyzer also made up of that content of consciousness? And thus, this separation inwardly does not translate outwardly through symbolic representation. same banner, same flag, same belief system, maintaining the continuity of this content of consciousness in the struggle of maintaining such a conflicted position within oneself that requires energy to maintain its continuity, and then outwardly looking to shape the direction of words, shape the direction of images, shape the direction of money, so that the symbolic representation of thought is able to hold dominion. And we can see this for ourselves in a world ever more greatly politically divided. And the human being gathers together under symbolic representation and begins to analyze through the confines of the analyzer. And the human being, the individual, struggles, is in conflict, feels the highs and the lows of the image-making process, whether it's in one's favor and when it's not. But always must that continuity of consciousness continue. Why? What is the fear that rests within the human being, nestled, disquieting? And yet, all one has to do is go out into nature and see for oneself the silence that permeates between raindrops, leaves rustling, thunder roaring. And so, we've come upon whether the individual in its root meaning, in its true meaning, is indivisible. But such equality cannot suffice, because without the mirror of relationship, there can be no orderly or sane or intelligent manner of working together, of sharing together, of thinking together. So, what is the human being to do as it has to come together to solve for problems? Can the human being get together on a basis of which is completely free from the known? Now, obviously, knowledge is required to ascertain between this and that, here and there, then and now. But as it comes to resolving for the conflict inward, which humanity has never been able to do, humanity has always been at war. Humanity has always been battling addiction. Now there's a interesting aspect to societies coming together. The notion of being able to be there for one another, to carve out a space from the mental loop that is addictive behavior. And it seems that through the 20th century there was a coming together like never before. It was monumentous, but not enough to have the human being resolve in its entirety. And so, the symbolic, the representational, the analogous began, like in most other instances of problem solving together, to take root, to take a hold. The role of tradition and its mechanical process, handed down, sought to be construed exactly, never touched by the nature of chronological time. Chronological time being separate from psychological time. Chronological time is the waves and its erosion on the rocks. It is the brush fires that occur through coincidence and through ease. The procreating, living, and dying process. The explosion and the formation of stars, and ultimately, the expansion of the universe. Is it not? Chronological time shapes all, ultimately. And such a division between psychological time and chronological time appears to be at the center of the dilemma of the human being. Now, who is to take what's being said here seriously? In a world where internet videos are fast-paced, quick, attention-grabbing, provide more and more and more in every step of the way. Lights, sound, music, distraction, concentration, and separation. Turn on the news and we see problem solvers, politicians, solving for problems through conditioned perspective, conditioned lens. There's no mental space for equanimity, resolution as a whole. Perhaps, as the computer gets more and more sophisticated, the effect on the human being will become more and more substantial. As the human being looks within fragmentation, of which occurs only more fragmentation, because the looker itself is a fragment of that fragmentation, and can see that the computer can go on and on and on in fragmentation. And the human being's reaction to the computer and its ability to compute, essentially between this and that, here and there, and then and now. The limitations of which is apparent as a natural reaction to the computer's ability to do as such. Eventually, may have a reaction that's quite visceral. Disquieting. And perhaps there's a chance the human being then can come to an accord through resonance and through debate, through argument, and through investigation, meaning coming to a conclusion based on opinion. but rather being able to see thought's limitation together. Being able to come together in such an honesty and say, I am thought. I am an image that exists in the world mind, exists to the observer, whoever this observer may be. And such a beginning can be the end to the conflict over ideology, over symbolic representation, over the notion of there being a fixed observer, the notion of the locality of the universe somehow separate from the observer's storing and gathering the recording of such experience. But as of right now, perhaps, the reality of this world continues on as such. And that would have to be as okay as it can be. Radical may be considered what this approach is. But the quality of a love unconditional is radical in a world set on its condition and its ways. The coming to find that the world is oneself. The knowledge, memory, and experience of it makes up what the world may be. And that for there to be a fundamental change in the world, then it is never separate from the question of insight, the question of whether the content of consciousness can ever be set free into a natural rhythm. Whether creativity from such a open lens, empty canvas, whether such a creativity can make the means for a world radically different. Are the things that interest us as we inquire together, look together. But once again, what of the acceptance of the world as it is? Fragmented, torn, disillusioned, frustrated, unhappy. Whether words can make a difference. It is a question that depends on whether the limitation of words itself is apparent. And whether silence, in its naturally bountiful essence, can mark an unknown, a state of unknowing. And that being able to act skillfully from there is the best one can do.